All right, everyone, welcome and thank you for coming to this virtual debate hosted by NCA and its Committee for International Discussion and Debate, or CIDD. I'm Mike Middleton, a faculty at the University of Utah and chair of CIDD. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge and thank the other members of the committee, including CIDD's incoming chair, Gina Iberi-Shea of the United States Air Force Academy, Erica Thomas from California State University, Fullerton, Carolyn Calloway Thomas from Indiana University, Bloomington, and Satoru Aonuma from International Christian University, Tokyo. Likewise, we would like to extend our thanks on behalf of the committee to Justin Danowski, Executive Director of NCA, and to NCA's Alexis Rice and Patrick West for their help with publicity, tech, and more for this event. For those of you not familiar with CIDD, since 1922, the committee has facilitated debate exchanges with the UK, Japan, the former Soviet Union, India, Pakistan, and the Philippines, just to name a few. Central to the mission of CIDD are several goals, including broadening the scope of international educational and cultural exchanges, reinforcing the importance of dialogue as a preferred means for resolving international and intercultural differences, as well as differences more generally, maintaining and enhancing the ties between the national communication and speech and debate organizations, and providing opportunities to enhance an understanding and appreciation of the discipline of communication and the important role of argumentation and debate within the discipline, both in other nations and in the United States. We believe today's debate, featuring debaters from Tanzania, Slovenia, Japan, and the United States, and focused on the timely issue of open borders and immigration, continues that tradition. So without further ado, I will turn things over to my colleague, Satoru Aonuma, to introduce the debate format, the topic, and our exceptional student debaters. But before I pass it to Satoru, we're so glad to have such a large audience. As the debate begins, if you're willing to turn on your camera, I've never met a debater who doesn't like positive nonverbal feedback, so we invite you to offer that to them if you're willing. Satoru, it's all yours.
Thank you, Mike. A very good morning from Tokyo, Japan. My name is Satoru Aonuma. I teach rhetoric and communication at International Christian University in Tokyo, Japan. It is my great honor to moderate this international debate exchange. The resolution for today's debate is resolved that this House believes that open borders benefit national economies and societies. Resolved that this House believes that open borders benefit national economy and societies. Now, adopting British parliamentary debate format, today's debate features a series of 8 speeches performed by 8 excellent college debaters representing 4 countries, namely the United States of America, the United Republic of Tanzania, the Republic of Slovenia, and Japan. Now, 2 teams proposing and affirming the resolution or motion are Team USA and Team Tanzania. First, Team USA. The first speaker is Maria Manousakas of the University of Utah. The second speaker is Tyler Crivella of the University of Texas at Dallas. The other team supporting the resolution is Team Tanzania. The first speaker is Callie Davis of Herbert Kairuki Memorial University. The second speaker is Kareem Bornifes of Tumaini University. Now, opposing the open border policy are Team Slovenia and Team Japan. Representing Slovenia, the first speaker is Lena Pfeiffer of the University of Amsterdam. The second speaker is Lara Kocheva of Durham University. Finally, representing Japan, first speaker is Hitoha Nagoro of University of Tokyo. The second speaker is Aya Fuji of Keio University. Now, each debater is given 7 minutes to speak, and during the speeches, questions or points of information may be raised by the opposition members, except the first and last minute of each speech. One important disclaimer to the audience members. Please be reminded that the arguments and comments made during this debate do not necessarily reflect the debater's own personal views, the policy of the countries they represent, or of the National Communication Association. The other important information to the audience members. Now, chat box function of the Zoom is enabled so that you can ask questions, make comments about arguments during the course of debate, but you cannot do that orally. Please type in your questions or comments during or after the debates using the chat box functions. Now, without further ado, let the debate begin. Let's turn to Maria for her first speech.
This House believes that open borders benefit societies and economies. This debate is not about whether borders should exist, it is about what borders are allowed to do. The opening government's position is simple. When borders are used to restrict human movement beyond what is necessary, they do not protect societies. They produce inefficiency, precarity, and unnecessary control. Human movement is not a threat to be managed away. It is a normal feature of how societies adapt, survive, and function in an interconnected world. Framing and definitions. We define open borders as a policy direction where states significantly reduce restrictions on migration, particularly for labor and long-term residency. This involves moving away from exclusionary quotas and nationality-based barriers towards managed freedom of movement. This does not mean no governance. It means migration happens legally, predictably, and with rights rather than being pushed into irregular or exploitative systems. This is a normative debate. We are not claiming that all states already have open borders. We are asking whether societies would be better off with greater openness relative to the status quo. Our burden is to show that when people are allowed to move to where they can live and work safely, both economies and social systems function better. Contention 1. Restrictive borders misallocate human potential. Openness allows societies to function more effectively and stably. Our core claim is this. Most of the harms we associate with migration come from restrictions, not movement itself. When borders prevent people from going where they are needed or safe, societies lose economically and fracture socially. First, the economic mechanism. Across the world, labor markets do not fail because there are too many people. They fail because people are stuck in the wrong places. In countries like the United States, entire sectors of labor, such as agriculture, healthcare, construction, hospitality, and others, already rely heavily on migrant labor. Restrictive immigration does not protect workers. Instead, it creates shortages and pushes work into informal arrangements and raises costs for everyone. This makes it so that workers are less safe to do things like collectively bargain, POI.
But it is true that this is something that is beneficial for economies and these workers are lacking. Why would we not allow these kind of migration even under closed borders?
Governments currently are incentivized to not allow people to come in because they're using it to win things like elections instead of actually benefiting the economy. So, restrictive immigration does not protect workers. It creates shortages and pushes these into more informal arrangement. When migration is legal and accessible, workers pay more in taxes, compete on equal footing, and stabilize markets rather than distorting them. In aging societies such as Japan or Italy, the problem is not unwillingness to work, but demographic reality. Shrinking workforces and aging populations place more pressure on healthcare systems and social services, with there not being enough people to fill in the gaps. Greater openness allows societies to supplement their labor force, particularly in care work and essential services, without relying on overwork or austerity. In smaller or highly integrated societies, whether that be Slovenia, Portugal, or parts of Eastern Europe, labor mobility helps counter population decline and keeps communities economically viable. With the EU already having more open borders policies, allowing more freedom of movement, it allows for these labor sections to be filled in. Openness here is not about just importing labor, but about preventing stagnation and allowing people to go where they're most economically viable. In other contexts, including regions like East Africa, South Asia, or Central America, cross-border mobility already plays a significant role in household and regional economic resilience. This is not a claim that borders are currently open, nor that mobility is unregulated. It simply acknowledges that when people can move through legal and predictable channels, they are better able to convert opportunity elsewhere into stability at home through remittance, education, and long-term investments. This is not dependence, but is rather interdependence in a globalized world. Across all these cases, the point is the same. Restricted borders trap people in low productivity or unsafe environments, while openness allows labor to flow to where it is actually needed. Second, strengthening society. That same logic explains why open borders strengthen social cohesion. When people are denied legal pathways, they are forced into invisibility. That invisibility produces exploitation, informal economies, and distrust of institutions. By contrast, legal mobility reduces precarity. In the United States, undocumented status discourages people from reporting abuse, accessing healthcare, or participating fully in civic life. When legal pathways exist, participation becomes normal. People invest in their communities, start businesses, and raise families. And it's how societal trust is built, not through exclusion, but rather through inclusion. In aging societies, managed openness supports public goods rather than undermining them because people are integrated into existing institutions instead of becoming excluded from them, such as providing more healthcare in aging societies. In regional systems, mobility allows households and communities to absorb shocks, whether economic or political. This is not a failure of governance, but rather it is a recognition that flexibility and movement are sources of mobility. Social cohesion does not come from walls. It comes from predictability, legality, and the ability to plan a future. While the opposition might try and claim that social cohesion will break down when there's more freedom of movement, instead it allows people to integrate into societies and not have to be rhetorically constructed as the other, such as when someone's seen as illegal and not seen as part of society. This allows for there to be more social cohesion, because instead of there just being legal questions about someone, they're able to more freely move in an open border system. Finally, the political implications. When movement is criminalized, states expand detention, surveillance, and discretionary enforcement. When movement is legal, those systems become less necessary. Open borders do not weaken states. They reduce the need for coercive control. Governments are pushed to govern through legitimacy and public goods rather than confinement and fear. Borders, in conclusion, should be managed movement, not block human potential. Open borders allow for society to allocate labor more efficiently and strengthen social trust, not because movement is perfect, but because restriction is costly and ultimately harms society more than it helps. This is clear through both the social lens as well as economically. By allowing people to integrate into society freely with open borders, it's a better result for everyone, both domestically and abroad.
Thank you, Maria. Now we turn to Lena for Leader of Opposition speech.
I hope I'm audible. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. The biggest issue with the opening government's case is the fact that they predict that this is going to be something that is regulated, regular, and the states are able to handle this. In opening opposition, we're going to prove to you why this is something that is just unable to happen at the point at which open borders are not something that suits our current systems. 3 pieces of framing, firstly, before moving into our speech. I think what's lacking in this debate is characterization of migration patterns. This means that firstly, we're going to still have existing migration flows and directions, which means that majority of migration is coming from developing countries to developed. So majority of immigration is going to be centered in countries in Europe, the US, these type of stuff. But second of all, this happens in 2 ways. Rather, this looks like increased flow at all times, as in just people who are seeking a better life, such as economic immigrants, so the some stable flow at all times. But also we have periods of irregular migration, such as spikes. This means, for example, after natural disasters or conflicts or economic crisis in a specific country, people just want to leave this country. Then, secondly, what changes with minimal open borders? I think we agree with opening government here that this means that you have rest regulations, but it's very important to know that there are no quotas, no filters, and also no possible redistribution of immigrants between countries. Then, what is very important is what do we support on our side of the house is this is the last part of what stays the same. I think we already see that we have some selective migrations, such as, for example, Lara is currently in the UK on a student visa. There exist visas that you get based on specific jobs and these type of things. I think because of the lack of workers in specific sectors OG mentions, this is something that we're going to be doing on both sides anyways. Moving on into their case then, I'm going to bring you two cases about economic harms in state capacity, and in the second speech, Lara is going to talk about social perception. First case then, economic harm to wage depression and inequality. Firstly, why does this happen? I think what happens when you have open borders is you just have sudden labor supply increases. This is going to be specifically in low-skilled sectors such as construction, casework, hospitality, agriculture, because these are the sectors which immigrants are the easiest to get jobs in because they don't require extensive education and these type of things. What happens then is that employers gain significant bargaining power. This means that instead of 2 workers competing for one job, now you suddenly have 20. So no matter how bad you treat your workers, how poor the wage is, there is 19 other people who now wanted this job. So therefore, your workers are very replaceable. Why? Then even if government says this is something that they're able to regulate, why this is something that is impossible? Firstly, just because you are unable to spawn more jobs, right? So for example, bringing a hotel that would employ more hospitality workers, this is something that takes ages. Because first you need to create a demand for who are the people that are going to go to this hotel and this type of things, right? So it's significantly harder to create enough jobs to be able to house all of these people. But second of all, even if you're able to adapt to some extent, the irregular characteristic of migrations, all of the spikes because of disasters and crises that I mentioned in the framing, just means that you're unable to plan in advance, right? So I don't know when is it going to be that I'm suddenly going to have a bigger amount of immigrants. So I'm unable to to create enough jobs for them to be able to work in a non-oversaturated market. Why is this then bad? Firstly, just simply quality of jobs decreases. At the point at which my workers as an employer are replaceable because I have so many other options to pick from, this means that I'm more likely going to do things such as abuse and harassment in workplace, inhumane conditions, forced over hours, all of these things. But second of all, this also means that wages are going to be lowered, right? Because now I have less incentives to treat my workers through raises and stuff like that. I don't care if they don't like it, because if they don't like it and they leave, I have all of those other workers I can pick from. So the conditions just in general become worse. And this harms a lot of people. Firstly, it just harms native workers, native people who already live in this country that don't have these issues before, but also just the immigrants that are coming in, right? The conditions they get into the country are just something that is not good for them. The comparative here is very simple. We have strategic immigration when we only issue visas for sections that are lacking workers to make sure that we don't overflow the supply of workers. Before moving on to the second argument, is there a POI?
Yes. How is this different than the current system of migration where workers are just undocumented and are still exploited?
I think even if undocumented workers exist to some extent, I think this is something that is going to significantly increase on your side of the house. Even if you're not calling them undocumented, you're still going to have significantly more workers working. The legal status of the worker doesn't matter, but I think at the point at which we have some more checks at the border, we just have significantly less people overflowing the labor supply. Then moving on into the second case, which is about how state capacity collapses. How does this happen? And I think there are 3 ways in which this happens. Firstly, this is housing shortages. This just creates more demand for housing because you have more people needing housing, which creates rent inflation and worse quality housing. Similar to mechanism in the jobs argument, now landlords are empowered to upsell houses because of the desperation on the market, right? There's a significant amount of people who are competing to get this one apartment, which means that now they're willing to pay higher prices because they really need a place to live. They're willing to live in moldy conditions because they really, really need a house. Second of all, schools and similar institutions also become overcrowded because immigrants likely come with families or just create families when they come to a country, and these kids need to go to work somewhere. And lastly, I think people just inevitably get sick, get injured. Therefore, they also overburden the healthcare system, who is not built to adapt to this system. Now, even if governments say that they're going to adapt to this influx, why are they unable to do that at any point? I think just the issue here is that this is already something that is a problem. I barely got an apartment in Amsterdam because even in the developed countries, you have a significant housing crisis, like the Netherlands, for example. This means that governments already have the absolute maximum incentive to expand on these capacities, but it's just simply impossible. There aren't enough doctors, teachers. No one wants to build affordable housing just simply because it's not profitable. And even if this is something that is possible to do, this is going to take ages. So if you want more doctors, you need to increase how many people you let into medical school. But these people are only going to able practice medicine in like 10 years. So you have 10 years through which you don't have enough doctors for all of the new people that are living in your country now. I think this is something that is just incredibly bad. Why? This affects just a large number of people. This affects both native citizens and immigrants, right? This means that people are forced to live in bad and moldy housing and overpay on rent because employers are are using this desperation. This means that kids are not getting proper education because there are too many students per teacher and they cannot get sufficient attention to actually improve in school. This means that patients have to wait in long waiting lines just to get basic medical attention because there isn't enough capacity to care for this increased number of people in the developed countries. The bottom line is that the way states and markets are structured, it is simply not suitable for open borders. The comparative is very simple. We want control and regulated migration to be able to avoid all the harms listed above.
Thank you, Lena. Now we turn to Tyler for his Deputy Prime Minister speech.
Thank you. Before I begin, if my debaters, when you're asking a POI, if you could use the raise hand function for me, that would be easiest, as the chat function sometimes gets a little cloudy. Perfect. The world that we hold this debate in is a shaky yet hopeful one. It is one in which the moral compass has always pointed north. NGO Freedom House has remarked that from the decline of monarchs in indentured servitude, to the proliferation of voting rights and access to information, that the world has on net given freedom after freedom, right after right. This debate, make no mistake, is more fundamental than the idea of monetary systems. It is a fight for the fundamental freedom of movement. It is thus with great honor that I affirm that this House believes that open borders benefit national societies and economies. In this speech, I'm first going to recharacterize what actually happens in the government's world. Second, I will introduce an argument concerning the marketplace of livelihoods. But first, addressing the mischaracterizations that we just heard from the leader of the opposition, it is unfortunate to say that most of their ideas concerning the economy are not rather if we have open borders or not. They are simply gripes with immigration as a whole. Increases in supply still happen in the opposition's world because they still facilitate movement to happen, yet with added restrictions and having a system that they claim will somehow be able to figure out how many workers are needed in certain areas. Yet no mechanism is provided as to how we can identify where workers are needed or not. No, thank you. And furthermore, they talk extensively as this need to increase the amount, or this increasing harm that will come to workers. They talk vehemently about the bad and terrible things that may happen if the power of labor decreases, and say that as individuals move to certain areas, they're likely going to have lower wages, may have trouble finding housing. Yet, in the other breath, are willing to tell you that these same people are fleeing from natural disasters. It is those people, the ones in those momentary spikes, that the opposition has an issue with. Yet, the proposition very clearly would rather prioritize in any world a short decrease in wages and the availability of housing in the short term if it means that people no longer have to live where wildfires are present, where wars are occurring, or natural disasters are happening. It is not the regular trends that the opposition takes harm with. It is that small minority of people that they claim could suddenly overwhelm positions. Yet on this, another point of refutation. First, the opposition has repeatedly characterized that people can move freely and quickly, yet seemingly has no issue when people living in an area experience problems. That is because the motivating cause behind migration is that people have issues with where they are living. That still holds true with the places that people are migrating into. If, for example, an individual nation were to be overwhelmed, it is the same mechanisms of a free and open border system that facilitate those problems to be solved in the advanced future. However, prior to moving on to our second contention, I see a point from, I believe it was the opposition whip. Was that Ann Hoff? Was there any
That's
points
an
on the
audience
floor
member.
from the
You can
opposition?
continue. You can continue.
Okay, all good. Any points from the leader of the opposition?
Yes. On our side of the house, we're still able to accept refugees and probably care for them. However, on your side of the house, the system is overburdened by regular economic immigrants who need help less than people fleeing these wildfires.
While the proposition is willing to engage with this model that the opposition brings up, there's a few notable differences. First, opposition characterizes that there's no legal difference, yet the entire difference of the proposition's model is that we are guaranteeing certain legal rights and freeing up those restrictions. That's a key difference, though, because it solves for most of the abuse scenarios that you're talking about. The leverage that people have over undocumented workers in the nations of America or others is facilitated because that privilege to work that job can be so strictly taken away because they are on an undocumented status. But now I'll move to our second point of contention to further implement as to why we should be providing this model on the proposition. In the past, we have seen leaders such as the US Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. articulate what is called a marketplace of ideas. The idea that if free speech were proliferated without restrictions, the best ideas would naturally rise to the top. The world of open borders is the next step in this ideal. It is one towards a marketplace of livelihoods. Opposition repeatedly attempts to claim that it is those that can easily flee that will likely face problems. Make no mistake, it is those that are having the hardest circumstances in the world that ought to be prioritized. It is those reporting on conflicts, such as Alexei Navalny, who, due to Russia's restrictive border policy, and as reported on by Reporters Without Borders, was likely unable to get a visa to another nation or a passport to escape the treacherous harms happening within the Russian Federation. It is those that Amnesty International documents are facing the atrocities in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea or North Korea that are unable to leave. These are the people that ought to be prioritized. And second, there's another reason that this simply works. It is because the option to find a better nation, an option to find a better job, addressing the first point of the opposition, means that all nations must rise to the occasion. A world in which an individual can leave a given nation to find more freedom, more access to information, is one that requires other nations to increase their standards of living if they want to continue having a base of workers to rely on. Consequentially, it forces nations to increase their societal rights, which is far more core to the issue than the economic harms that are always going to be reversed, because even though we've seen recessions, people usually die more often to things such as guns directly affecting them or natural disasters permanently reshaping the landscape. For these reasons, it is the option of moving to a other nation that ought not to be considered optional. Consequently, for the sake of the never-ending pursuit of freedom, for progress, and for the people of the world, we are so proud to stand in the affirmation of today's resolution.
Thank you, Tyler. Now, let us turn to Lara for her Deputy Leader's opposition speech.
To the debaters, please could you ask POIs verbally, just unmute yourself and ask, because I won't be seeing the chat or anything like that. Okay, I'll be starting on my next word then. The first thing that I think needs to be incredibly clear is the frame and what specifically we're talking about, because I think the government benches are still mischaracterizing it. Look, DPM says that increases in supply will happen on both sides of the house, then we are just talking about more restrictions. But you cannot enjoy both of those benefits at the same time. You have to concede to the fact that you will be significantly less regulatory. You will not have any controls or very, very limited controls over who will be coming through the borders, which means that increasingly, because the immigration flows are existent already in the status quo, but more so they are increasing because of, for example, global warming happening. More people are migrating to the global north because of economies that are fractured, because of wars that are happening, not even just as refugees, but I mean about as economic immigrants and stuff like that. Because the immigration flows are increasing and are just being projected to increase even more, you cannot claim the benefits that you will be able to manage our immigration efficiently. This is why I think that the case that Lena gives you you, the second argument, is incredibly important about state capacity failing, because it is not about just the concept of being illegal or being an illegal immigrant. It is about the fact that you have to actually have institutions that exist and are able to manage the amount of immigration that is occurring in these countries. Insofar as you just take away the concept of being an illegal immigrant does not mean that you are efficiently resolving the lives of these people, because they still have underfunded institutions in the countries that they're moving to. There's still no language programs for them to integrate into society. There's still very limited funding of schools that do dual language education. Therefore, just because government benches are removing the concept of being an illegal immigrant does not mean that they're actually improving the lives of the people. Two questions I want to answer in my speech. No, thank you. One is going to be on economy, dealing with most of what is coming out of their case. And secondly, I want to forward another argument about the social negatives. Cool. What does OG say? They basically assert that labor can self-allocate very well, and therefore restricting it in any way is bad. I think that this isn't true. I think that immigration that is happening is guided by personal preferences insofar as we're talking about economic immigration. That is to say that you are in a particular profession and you probably went to school, you probably educated yourself in your own country, but now you want to move on to a different country because you're likely going to be paid more if that's particularly what you're probably incentivized by when you're doing immigrations. And I think that this then means that there's a few target countries and many countries from which people are massively immigrating. I think that this is bad because I think that it's incredibly unlikely that individual people will going to be making the correct choices because they're currently in the status quo not, because there is no huge database to see how many jobs are available in the world and you can just self-allocate yourself to the best country of your ability. You're restricted by things like what is closest, what is most cheap, what is most effective for you, which means that you're probably going to end up in countries which are not going to have jobs for you. And then all of the arguments that Lena forwards about over competition and housing crisis and all that still hold incredibly true and are still incredibly powerful. I think that our comparative is incredibly better because the state is a better actor to allocate these things rather than everyone through open borders, because the state has comparatively more information. They're able to do, for example, direct visas for a particular sector that they need more workers in. This is how opening opposition accesses the impacts of opening government. And they want to talk about increased productivity of sectors. Only we can do that because only we can, as a state with more information and more capacity, recognize and allocate our resources well. I think this is incredibly unlikely on their side of the house. But I think the second thing that I want to talk about is also, I think, very important, is how will this impact also the countries in the global south from which people predominantly emigrate. I think I am incredibly willing to trade off any increase of productivity the opening government wants to talk about, because I think that this has lots of negative impacts. In particularly, I think that this leads to increased amount of brain drain in these economies. I think that the reason for this is incredibly simple. I think that at the point at which you have an open border policy and basically everyone can immigrate, the costs are lower. It takes far less time to get any sort of visa or anything like that. I think that just on scale, we're going to have more immigration happening. I think that this is bad for countries that are losing workers. I think that one, it is unlikely that you're going to be able to institutionally develop as well, because the people who could be your lecturers at your national university are now fleeing to other countries much easily and much more frequently. I think the people who would be your surgeons, your nurses in your home country are also leaving because they're now having the opportunity to just go, even if so much significantly more easily. I think that this is then the loss of productivity happening in these countries. And I think that because of how vulnerable their economies are, I think that this is significantly more important than a marginal increase in productivity in the global north. Secondly, then, let's talk about the idea of the social negatives that happened with this. The argument that I want to forward here is how immigrants are harmed on their side of the house because of the negative perception around them. Firstly, why does this happen? I think that because there's tangible economic difficulties, like increased labor competition and longer wait lists within the healthcare system, I think that these are institutional failures. It's likely that immigrants are blamed for this. I think that when people are facing harms and they feel insecure, they feel scared, they're more stressed, they seek to externalize these negative feelings to feel better about themselves and have something to direct their negative feelings in. I think that immigrants become the receiving end of this. I think that with an open border policy, it's far easier to buy into the narrative that the increased number of immigrants is the reason why there's less jobs and a failing welfare system. Now, the reason why this is very likely to occur, the reasoning is likely to occur on its own, is because it's a logical path of least resistance. It's comparatively easier to blame immigrants, no thank you, I think you're out of time, than it is to just engage with the societal and structural failures behind this. I think that this then means that it's incredibly likely that these people are blamed for this. But the second main reason as to why this is likely going to occur is because there's third-party actors which are likely to push very harmful the narratives around an open border policy. Specifically, I'm talking about right-wing parties and populist parties. Think about AFD in Germany. Think about Reform UK. I think there's two reasons why they're likely going to do this. I think one, they want support to get into power, and centering their campaigns around blaming immigrants is very low burden and high impact. It's very easy for them to gain votes that way. But I think that secondarily, once they are in power, I think pushing such narratives gives them a pathway to outsource their policy failures. So even though their party is failing economically, they get to blame immigrants, and because they've created an enemy for the people to target. What does this then look like? Why is this then incredibly bad? I think that firstly, immigrants with a lack of institutional support for integration happen because there's no resources to fund such things, but also now there's severe political opposition to funding things like language programs or schools that would be accessible to immigrants. I think that means that they're pushed into parallel communities. They're more vulnerable and they're easier to target. But I think secondarily, it's also hate campaigns that lead to horrible treatment. I think this looks like women who wear hijabs being verbally assaulted and literally spat on the streets. And I think that you have a significant increase of all of that at the point at which you have an open border policy, at the point at which people are literally incentivized and probably pushed into thinking such horrible things. For all these reasons, I'm very proud to oppose.
Thank you, Rara. Now we turn to Callie for member of government speech. Callie, please.
Okay, I'll begin in 3, 2, 1. So what side opposition is trying to tell us is that these migrants coming into the country are posed to harassment, exploitation, and low wages. What they fail to understand is that on our side, we're going to be bringing these open door policies while there are still laws being instigated in the nation. What does this mean? Migrants are going to be brought into the country with documentation. They're still going to be subjected under labor laws. They're still going to get paid minimum wages. They're still going to be subjected to safety rules in any workplace, and they're still going to be able to report any and all forms of abuse. So the whole instigation that our side, our laborers are going to be facing harassment and exploitation is completely wrong. On top of that, they came and said that it's going to lead to state capacity collapsing because there'll be low houses, there'll be enough schools to be able to accommodate all the students. What they fail to understand is that these immigrants aren't just going to be consumers, they're going to be producers as well. They're going to be working, they're going to be paying taxes, they're going to be paying rent. All of this is going to be taken back to the nation to make sure that they're able to accommodate these migrants that are coming into the nation. As a result, their side is completely negating it and acting like we don't oppose this. On top of that, they're talking about how these immigrants coming into the nation is going to lead to brain drain. Now, what they fail to understand is when immigrants come into a specific country, for example, let's talk about doctors or nurses. They're going to gain certain skills that they're going to be able to bring back to their home country. This is going to be even more beneficial to the healthcare system of the local country of the immigrants. On top of that, these laborers coming into these host countries are going to be earning minimum wages, which is pretty big amount in their country. They're going to be able to bring back remittance into their country. This is far much more beneficial than staying in a country where they're not getting paid enough money. So at the end of the day, our side is making sure that we bring benefit to both the country that's hosting them, not accepted, to both the country that is hosting them, but also the country that they're coming from. After saying all of that, I would like to state that opening government failed to show exactly how this open border system don't just help the country's economy, but also creates a system that has a wider distribution of opportunities, benefiting not only the immigrants, the locals, the host country, the country they're coming from, but also the nation at large. And I'm going to be saying points and explaining how this works, right? So first of all, open borders fix structural economic inequalities. The reality is there's so many countries where there's too many workers and few job opportunities, or vice versa, many jobs and aging population. A good example is Japan, and how there's an extreme aging crisis. As a result, many people were not able to get jobs because they're extremely old. So what happened? People from Southeast Asian countries came to occupy job positions in Japan, and this led to agriculture development, factory development, and generally increase in healthcare systems because they were able to take care of these aging people. What is the side opposition trying to tell us? They're assuming that people are just going to be coming into countries that are already highly populated, thus resulting to more problems. What our side is trying to tell you that since the government is going to make sure there are laws that are going to be regulated, we're going to be distributing migrants to countries that already have low population or aging population. Thus, there will not be a problem of too many workers and the immigrants are going to be facing exploitation. There will not be a problem that they're facing whereby there'll be housing problems. No, that's not going to exist on our side because the government is still going to be enforcing strict laws to make sure that this system is favoring both the locals and the immigrants coming into the country, right? So on our side, this is going to be benefiting both the laborers together with the locals because at the end of the day, side opposition might come and tell you that at the end of the day, if they come into our nation, they're going to be taking the existing job positions of the current workers. Now, this is when side proposition brings you forth labor segmentation. The reality is that there's going to be existence of two types of different jobs: the jobs that require physical intensive work and the jobs that require supervision, technical support, and planning. So what we're saying is when migrants comes into a host country, they're going to be given physical intensive jobs or jobs that doesn't require much expertise. But these jobs still make sure they get minimum wage and they get access to all employee benefits, by the way, but at the same time still creating enough room so that the locals can still take place in bigger jobs such as supervision jobs and technical and planning roles.
Yeah.
What does this mean? Means rejected. This means that we're able to make sure that there will be no existence of no job opportunities for both ends. At the end of the day, everyone is going to be benefiting from this. And at the end of the day, the country that the local immigrants are coming from and the actual locals are still going to be benefiting from this. Our second point is we're going to be talking about how there's going to be lower prices and raising of living standards. See, when there's an existence of labor demand, this is going to cause costs to be passed on to consumers. As a result, a vivid example is during COVID periods, because there's tighter border restrictions in USA, the labor shortage was extremely high, the crops weren't harvested, and the prices raised nationally to a very significant amount. What did this cause? This meant that people were not able to afford basic necessities, and the living standards are extremely difficult to be able to attain in USA. However, after the labor restrictions were slightly lowered after the COVID season, it caused this lowering of prices of the same goods. As a result, people were able to afford the goods that they wanted. This made people to be able to have better living standards and live much more comfortably. What does this mean? This leads to more productivity, more stability, and of course, economic resilience to the workers and to the nation at large. So at the end of the day, this is going to be beneficial to the nation. And lastly, the allowing open border systems actually brings about strengthening of innovations and companies. A vivid example is, let's take an example of Google. Google was founded by Sergey Brin, who was an immigrant who came to USA and established this foundation. Now, side opposition will come and keep saying the same thing, saying how on our side we're gonna displace all the local people from their job positions, but they fail to see that the existence of these migrants will actually create bigger job opportunities. Like the example of Google, this big conglomerate is now employing over millions of people in USA and millions of people all around the world, thus solving the economic and unemployment crisis worldwide just because of one migrant. On top of this, they're failing to see how these migrants are actually putting a much bigger benefit to the nation, because they're going to be transferring some of the skills that they learned from their countries into the nation as well. Lastly, I'm going to be talking about how it's going to reduce the crime rate in the country. At the end of the day, side opposition will come and tell you the existence of these migrants is going to bring it's going to bring a lot of problems because these migrants are going to be doing illegal jobs. But at the end of the day, our side is going to allow migrants to come in with proper documentation. The only reason why there is existence of these crimes is because these migrants are undocumented in these countries. Thus, they cannot be able to get jobs that are legal. And also, they're subjected to jobs that are said to be either one way or the other harming other people or causing harm to their own lives. But if we allow them to freely come into the nation, this is going to solve the problem, because we're going to allow specific people who meet the criteria into the nation. Thus, they won't be forced to be subjected to jobs that they're going to be performing in criminal activities. Instead, they're going to be doing jobs that are going to be benefiting the country at large. As a result, side proposition is for the world that is not only benefiting the locals of the country that's going to be hosting, but also the migrants that are coming from the countries. It's going to be benefiting the country as well, and also the country that the migrants are coming from. And as opening government, I've never been prouder to propose this motion.
Thank you, Callie. Now we're going to turn to Hitoha for her member of opposition speech. Hitoha, please.
Yes, thank you. Okay. Poise verbally, please, if there's any, or you can raise your hand, but I think I'll check voice more. Starting with my next word. Open borders depletes developing countries of those with the most intellectual ability and backgrounds, those that are the lifelines of the developing countries. Because we're against brain drain and the further inequality between countries, proud to oppose this motion. My speech outline is as follows. Number 1, stance clarification of closing opposition. Number 2, extension on brain drain and also on tax if time allows it. Rebuttals are integrated in the speech and will further come from our whip speaker. Number 1 on stance clarification. Our strategy strategy is not anti-immigrant, but anti-open borders as a policy. The opposition wins by showing that even if some migration is good, unconditional openness systematically harms economies and societies in ways that proposition cannot sufficiently mitigate. Opposition does concede that migration can be beneficial, cultural exchange can be positive, and some economies need migrant labor. Second, going on to our extensions. First, on brain drain. How does this happen? Because of two reasons. Number one, incentive, and number two, capacity. Number one, open borders remove retention barriers, allowing highly educated workers to leave immediately for higher wages and better working conditions. Number two, skilled workers face global demand and easy transferability, so they're the first to be recruited by richer states, hence leaving these developing countries. Why is this so bad? Because of three reasons. Number one, sending countries, the developing countries, lose a lot of doctors, engineers, teachers, hollowing out essential public services. Notice that this change is permanent, unlike what CG says, because there are better conditions abroad, right? This loss in resources is much bigger in harm than getting some trickle-down effect by getting money sent back from these countries, but not having any places to use it because your country is not as developed and these kinds of things are not yet there in that country. But the second reason why this is bad is because governments lose returns on public investment in education, worsening fiscal capacity. Because no matter how much they fund these young people, all of these people are going to go abroad, meaning that there's only harms left to taxpayers in that country. Number three, inequality between states deepens as poorer countries lose the very people that are needed for development. And humanitarian aid is simply not enough to cover these kinds of harms, right? The counterfactual is this. Managed migration allows temporary, circular, and conditional mobility, preserving domestic capacity. Notice that though OG talks about how their open borders is under control, we're able to do this much, much better relatively, right? Because of the number of people coming in are much smaller, we're able to allocate more resources to each person to check and allow this kind of person, right? We're also able to do this while balancing out between the social conditions of the accepting country, which changes very rapidly, as you can see from the world right now, right? But also, states can retain critical workers while still benefiting from remittances and skill exchange, benefiting developing countries. Hence, any benefits that CG claims about brain drain, we're able to carry this much better on our side of the house. Why is this point so important? Because of three reasons. Number one, because developing countries need the most help, right? On the standard of vulnerability, this in itself pushes us over most of the opening team's arguments, which are about developed countries. But secondly, state capacity is a prerequisite for development. Without skilled professionals, countries cannot deliver things like healthcare, education, or governance and grow as a country as a whole. But number three, open borders entrench global inequality. This is the most important point, right? By extracting human capital instead of building institutions and making long-term poverty unavoidable on their side of the house. This is the reason why brain drain is so harmful, and we're able to stop this uniquely by having restricted migration. Second extension then, going on to how taxpayers stop supporting welfare systems. Why does this happen? Because welfare systems rely on bounded solidarity, right? People pay taxes believing that the recipients are part of a shared social contract. However, open borders completely destroy this by allowing instant access to public goods without prior contribution. This prior contribution is the key word in this extension. People who've lived there their whole lives lose trust in the welfare because though they've put in like thousands of money into it, people who haven't before are now benefiting from the same kinds of institutions and healthcare and things like that. Why is this so bad? Because of two reasons. Number one, loss of trust leads to electoral pressure for things like welfare cuts, stricter eligibility, or lower taxes, directly shrinking welfare systems. But secondly, resentment towards immigrants creates dangerous situations for both parties, right? Because you're going to feel that the other party is neglecting you, or the other party is taking away the benefits that you were promised when you were a child and decided to stay in that country. This leads to things like, for example, throwing things at the other group because you feel this kind of resentment, or doing dangerous demonstrations that harm the safety of these people. Even in the idealistic situation of no financial problems arising, the country is really perfect at this open migration thing. It is very important to note that even when immigrants contribute a lot, perceptions are what drives political support for welfare and not fiscal reality, right? Hence, if you see much more people of these immigrants coming in, you're going to feel a lot of pressure and the need to demonstrate that this is really bad for you. Any poise especially from opening?
oppressive governments do not care about the welfare state, do not care about their people, and do not care about giving them labor. These people should be allowed to leave these nations.
Um, I I believe you're talking about how people are able to freely go out of the country as well. But given that when they were a child, they thought that they were getting these kinds of benefits, it is very, very unlikely and unrealistic for them to change their whole environment when all of their family, all of their friends are there. I think that this is a pretty unrealistic situation. Okay, so for going back to my speech, these are the two reasons why taxpayers stop supporting welfare systems and why this is so bad. The counterfactual is that because the number of immigrants is limited on our side of the house, we can guarantee more benefits for everyone, right? And we can also provide restrictions. For example, these people have to pay a certain amount of money to get into the country, or they have to promise to stay for a number of years. These kinds of promises ensure that tax is given to more people. Why is this so important? Because the trust in government is the first step for any country to thrive, right? Without it, people are going to act in ways where you cannot control these people's movements. But secondly, this proves why, though it would be idealistic to save everyone in natural disasters by letting them in, as DPM states, this creates a lot of harm to the people both in developed and developing countries, such as not getting medicine when needed because the tax is not enough anymore for all of these people coming in. And it also creates a lot of conflict between groups, which is a huge, huge harm to any of the people that are living inside the country. Because we want everyone to feel safe and to develop accordingly, we're very proud to oppose this motion.
Thank you, Hitoha. Now let's turn to Kareem for government whip speech. Kareem, please.
Sorry. Pardon, is my camera working?
Not really at this point, but I can hear you. We can hear you.
Is that okay? Can I go on like this? Because there's a problem with the connection in my area.
Okay, sure. Yeah. Go ahead.
Thank you. Okay. Starting my speech in, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Now, panel, from the very beginning of this debate, we have seen that side opposition continues to characterize the entire form of migration and the open borders in general as something that it really is not. Now, number one, we had them characterize open borders as something that is unstructured, unregulated, and unrealistic. Then they come in and they continue to tell us that when we're going to have open borders, we're just going to have people coming into these developed countries, and then they're completely ignoring and completely pretending as if there's not going to be outward movement of the same people that are of these locals that they're trying to defend from the very beginning. Now, moving on from there, they continue to characterize migration as something that creates permanent homes or permanent residence in new countries. They're creating a sense of understanding, whereas people are moving from countries that are developing and moving into developed countries and never leaving back to their country, something that my member of government continue to elaborate on. Now, I would like to clear this up by recharacterizing something the same way my member of government did it before. She said that our open borders are going to be structured and regulated, giving laws and proper understanding to even these workers that they're trying to support, who, according to them, are being treated unfairly and will go through so many problems such as discrimination and other work-related problems. Okay, moving on from there, my member of government again came and spoke about how, as much as we may have people migrating into these countries, we're going to have other people moving out of these countries, which is going to be creating a clear flow of incoming and outgoing migration, which will help not just one country, not just the receiving countries, the developing countries, but instead will also help the countries, the developing countries from which people are coming from, countries such as the US, Japan, and moving to such countries, because in those countries, then they're going to have much more people that are going to also be allowing growth in their area. Again, we continue to speak about remittances, something the side opposition has completely tried to ignore this entire time. Moving on from there, The last speaker from side opposition came in and told us that without professionals, it's going to be hard for a country to grow. But then again, the same side opposition continues to tell us that professionals should not, like other people, should not come and gain knowledge and this professionalism from these countries, then move back to their countries. So what exactly they're trying to show us is biasness in who exactly deserves development. As much as they're trying to make us believe that they want development for everyone, it's clearly seen that development for them stands only for the developed countries, and they're leaving behind the developing countries from the very beginning. Now, another thing that they spoke about was resentment and conflict among the people, among the locals and the people that are coming in. This is a problem that is currently being seen even with closed borders, because groups are being marginalized simply for the fact that they are being left out of countries. We have people standing in borders and are kicking out families that are unable to protect themselves from the countries that they're from, and they're trying to gain refuge in these countries. Instead of wasting our resources on things like that, we should put much more resources in protecting things that are inside our country, something that my member of government completely touched upon. Now, moving from there, I would like to give you the main clashes that I have seen coming from side opposition and side proposition. Number one, we spoke about impact to the immigrants, whereas side opposition continues to tell us that immigrants will only face abuse. We told you that it would be better for them to come and experience a better lifestyle compared to the places that they're coming from. Because we're looking, I will not take that. Because when we're looking at the places that they come from and looking to the places that they're going into, we clearly see that it's not a matter of them wanting luxury, but then a matter of them wanting survival. Moving on from there, opening government was able to touch on this. Opening government failed to help us understand how exactly these immigrants will be benefiting, whereas we came in and we showed you how remittances will be helping in comparison to indirect funds that are being given as help or as aid from other countries. And further than that, we continue to mechanize for you how our open borders will be working significantly, not just for the stakeholders, the individual people, but then again for the countries. Whereas we spoke about institutional improvement. Next, I will not take that. Next, I would like to speak on various arguments given by side opposition that continued to become clashed by my member of government, but have continued to arise, clearly showing a lack of understanding and a lack of proper engagement on the issue. Number one, they spoke about resources, and we continue to show them that the immigrants are not just going to be consumers; instead, they're also going to be producers. Number two, we spoke about the condition of the immigrants, which we're able to show them through laws and various rules that are going to be implemented during the open border will continue to be solved. Number three, they tried to show us the nature of immigrants that are coming in are immigrants that are only wanting to use their resources without actually working. But this is not. But even now, when we have closed borders, we already see the level of work and the level of impact that is being seen by immigrants, who, by the way, are not even being paid because of the fact that there are so many restrictions. Now, lastly, another thing that they spoke about was labor competition, whereas my member of government came and cleared up that the labor that will be done will be complementary and never competitive, because we have so many places that are lacking with people to come and work in, and instead we will now have people to come work for such posts. I will not take that. To solidify our argument, we were able to explain to you the economic value of this and the social impact of this. Number one, in economy, we spoke to you about labor movement, which will be allowing employment. We spoke to you about the high demand of goods that will be creating, that will be saving some countries from economic backlash through remittances and other such aids coming directly from the individuals rather than from funds. Number two, we spoke when it comes to the social impact. From the social impact, we were able to explain how this integration will continue to create diversity, which will lead to innovation that will better help us as well as in our economy, and in other ways, helping each individual improve their living standards. Now, to summarize, what exactly have both sides of the House shown you today? While side opposition has continued to go against the open border system, the closed border system has not shown us anything that would be better than the open border. And every single time that they have tried to go against the open border system, the open border system's benefits have seemed to become better than even
Thank you, Kali. Excuse me, Karine, for your speech. Now, let's welcome very last speech of today's debate, Aya, to deliver opposition whip speech. Aya, please.
If you have any POI, please vocalize it. I won't see the chat. Okay. I'll start my speech in my next word. Okay. I think this debate, in this debate about the argument about how this kind of country who accept this kind of immigrant is a kind of deadlock. We are not sure about how the government, the kind of national government has the capacity to care enoughly about this kind, enoughly to this kind of immigrants, or whether this kind of immigrants can bring a lot of the benefits to this kind of country. Then I think that our CEO, the closing opposition, is a unique position that gives you the clear impact or clear damage for the kind of country. For the people who are left behind in the country. There are some people who cannot immigrate to this kind of country in the first place. We give the most tangible impact, most tangible damage for this kind of the most vulnerable people. So proud to stand in CO. So three things to do in my speech. First is about the engagement towards the closing government and the opening government, and lastly the opening opposition as a wing. The first is about the closing government. The argument was mainly like that there be the better labor or care for the lack of the care for this kind of lack of the labor force or such kind of thing. But I think the industry that most needs the labor will not have enough opportunity to hire workers in the first place because there is a competition to capture this kind of labor. Maybe in their world, because there is a lot of the labor or coming immigrants, maybe the company or maybe the industry have to opt into this kind of competition of the labor. For example, they have to provide a better wage compared to the other company in order to keep this kind of workers, in order to avoid this kind of worker to move to other jobs or such kind of thing. Maybe the kind of the industry with a lack of labor don't have enough capacity to pay enough for this kind of immigrants, meaning that they will lose opportunity to hire a lot of the workers at least enough to care for this kind of labor support. But second, their argument was that there is a better economic activity or innovation like the benefit in the industry. But I think this kind of the better economic activity is a very extremely rare case. Even if this kind of open border will have to increase the chance for innovation or stuff like that, the delta is so marginal. The burden of proof was firstly why immigrants uniquely have the higher chance to create innovation, but two, why some talented immigrants can be allocated to the suitable company. For example, in order to make the innovation, they have to be in the company with rich resources that allow them to make innovative idea into reality. But even if we take the best case, our argument about the brain drain is more important. The member of the government engaged with our argument of the brain drain by saying that they can bring back their skills, but it very rarely happens because the people who have migrated probably don't have the incentive to go back to the country. According to government stance, the reason why this immigrant is they immigrate is seeking for a better chance for wages or living environment or such kind of thing. They will stay in the country that they have immigrated. That is why this kind of bringing back the skill will not happen. Our argument will be more happen in a more higher likelihood. Moving on to the engagement with the OG. The OG's argument first is about the labor force, but I think there's no solvency. They will I think that this kind of labor will not go to will rather go to the growing industry like the IT company or stuff like that. They will not go to for example, the nursing case or such kind of thing. But secondly, we see that there is a better alternative such as the AI or technology. We see that instead of hiring the 100 workers who might get sick or who have to leave the work to certain times, so in certain times, for instance, it would be more strategic to introduce a 1 or 2 AI in order to refill this kind of the lack of the labor force, right? The second is about Second argument was the documented immigrants will give a better public support, but since there is no capacity to treat all of the immigrants, open border doesn't necessarily mean the country can administer all the immigrants and give support. Even some developed country cannot allocate the even budget or even to the all documented immigrants, right? Why did this happen? Because one, even if the country accepts the immigrants, they have to prioritize allocated budget for other citizens who live in the nation in the first place. For example, let me take the context of the OC, like the Asian society. This country have to pay a lot for the social welfare for elderly. But second, the government also don't have the financial capacity because the taxpayer will not agree with further budget allocation increase for immigrants. This was already sufficiently explained by our member. This already suggests no matter how much benefits like the labor supply immigrants bring to their country, the public support for them will not increase but rather decrease. But thirdly, they said that their option to immigrate itself is important. But it sounds great, but it's very principle based, right? Because firstly, they didn't prove how this actually going to materialize on their side. But second, it's a humanitarian aid available and can help people in the natural disaster. Countries must protect their citizens first, but slowly the natural disasters happen in developed countries as well. If you let people in it unconditionally, they are going to live in area where they are prone to natural disaster and be just as even more dangerous compared to their own country. But even if we again, even if we take the best case, we have to focus more on the who cannot migrate in the first place, right? For example, even if there is a good system to immigrate to other country, the people who get benefit is those who have the economic capacity or physical capacity to do so. The option works only for these limited people, but also comparative, we already proved to you how this how people left behind in the country will significantly suffer from brain drain. Obviously, they will face a severe lack of necessary human resources or like the doctors or teachers, etc. What is important here is our argument applies to people in the most need, knows that they will face this severe situation automatically once they have open borders. For them, there will be inevitable change. They cannot avoid this damage and suffer from even necessary basic services like medical treatment. Then when with all of the other three teams, why brain drain is from causing operation is the most important argument in this debate. The brain drain happen in the means the most high likelihood, right? The argument for government can be happen, but it won't happen in the several contexts. Argument about the increased supply of the labor force or stuff like that is contingent on the premise that the larger number of immigrants will opt into this kind of industries that lack the labor force. The argument for the opening operation as well will be happen, but it was well engaged by the opening government or closing government by explaining that at least a better labor force or government support. So this argument about the country which accept immigrants is a dead work at the end of the day. And then this debate boils down to the country of the immigrant homes and their home country. We say in the most highest likelihood, there is a kind of loss of the necessary labor force, especially for this kind of basic necessity like the doctors or teachers. What will the people left behind this country face is like there is a lack of the medical treatment when they are needed. There are lack of the good teachers in the education, meaning that there is a poor quality of the education in their own country. We say it is the most tangible impact related to the daily living. We prove to the most tangible and important impact. Proud to stand in closing operation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aya. This concludes today's debate. Once again, please give them big hands using Zoom function probably. Thank you. I see hearts and big hands and great. Okay, it's time to pick some questions from the audience. Thank you for typing your questions and comments in the chat box and question and answer box. We have probably 10 minutes to address these questions. Let me just read the first question from question and answer box, and any debater probably can answer this question. Okay, let me just read this question for you first. Can you please address the way in which open borders creates opposition between the natives who feel that they are being invaded and the ones who are coming in, especially if they are getting benefits like healthcare, housing, etc., the native aren't getting? Any debaters can answer this question.
I can answer the question.
Great, Maria.
For me, I think that rhetoric already exists around people migrating, especially within the US context, how it's already a us versus them mentality, but open borders can provide more safety and paths to legal immigration into places where people are actually seeing benefits and can feel safer at their places of work and in their life in general.
Thank you. Any other debaters?
I can also answer.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think the context in which I come from, so like not the US concept, content, I think it also kind of doesn't really matter what kind of an immigrant you are. As in, for example, the kind of rhetoric we see around immigrants isn't are you legal, are you illegal, but it's rather just you are different from me, you are of a different ethnicity, you are of a different race. For example, we have differences in religion, as in Bosnians immigrating to Slovenia. And I think just that, no matter what the status of this immigrant, is enough to discriminate. So I think at the point at which there is an increase of that, and people are actually feeling tangible consequences, and even if they're not, even if it's just right-wing governments making it up, I think that the fact that these immigrants are always going to be different in some ways, people are going to be able to find some differences, is already enough to kind of cause like a lot of discrimination, I think.
Thank you, Lena. Okay, now the second question is from Chatbox. Let me just read this for you. Prioritizing people in dire conditions is a partial, superficial, and unsustainable proposal. There are approximately 22 million people living under conditions of extreme oppression in North Korea. How does this proposal address this fundamental issue? Probably this is addressed to the proposition team, or anybody can answer this question.
I think this was addressing me, so I'm gonna go ahead and start off, and then I'm happy to. I think that just sort of laying the cards out, being on the proposition, I always kind of like weighing arguments, and I think that there's a layer to this debate we didn't get to that is sort of who are migrants as a whole? Like we talked a lot about migrants that are moving because of labor conditions. An argument that I as probably came up in the debate. I'm interested in what happens under like oppressive regimes and what happens to these individuals who probably like are willing to take isms and xenophobia or other things, even though it's bad because it's better than like not eating or not having a home. And I think that on net, like if we're just weighing as the world, I don't know. I kind of think that we should give these people jobs, even if my wage goes down a bit, because like they should live. And I think that another part we didn't quite get to is what's the model of the proposition necessarily entail? I do think that 22 million people, like just if they walk across the border tomorrow, because I don't know, we vote half. Like I don't necessarily know what happens, and I don't necessarily know what happens to these North Korean individuals. That being said, I think that um, any amount of migration out of oppression is probably preferable to the restrictions and sort of like the rhetoric of the opposition, which is probably like go through these pathways that like probably don't exist right now, or etc. I think that the proposition probably has a better case in these than nothing at all.
Thank you. Anybody else on that? Okay. Turn to the third question from question answer box. Let me go to the second one. Okay, this is the question to probably either side. How does documentation defy a citizen's political point of view? Should immigrants face more fees and taxes than Americans? I guess there are two questions, but okay. Anybody?
I can also take this.
Okay.
I think this question is kind of a two-layered question because one is kind of a moral judgment of what would be the right, like what should be done. But then the issue is that this is not necessarily how it works in practice. I think in like abstract world, I would absolutely say there shouldn't be like a reason to differentiate someone just because of the place they were born, right? Like this is just random. We don't pick in which country we were born. Therefore, it makes no sense on that level that we're treated differently. But I think sadly then a lot of this plays out on a perception level. As in, the reasons why Americans have to be prioritized over immigrants is because it is the Americans that can like do the most harm if they believe that the government is doing bad things, right? So it is always the native populations that if they are not prioritized, which for some reason they feel like they should be because of all of the nationalism rhetorics of like this is our land or whatever, I think at the point at which these ideas exist and these people are going to rage, do hate crimes, vote in like objectively harmful politicians, I think this is something that is then just like in practice, it is probably going to do more harm for these type of actions to exist than for an immigrant to have to fill in some more paperwork or to have to pay some more things. It is just on a scale of like what will happen.
Thank you. Anybody else on that particular questions or?
To add on to that, I don't think this was really touched on in the debate, but I feel like a lot of the root cause is just wealth inequality that often gets scapegoated to migrants, where a lot of people feel like people aren't paying their fair share when really it's just because there's such extreme wealth inequality in many areas of the world.
Thank you. Okay, we could continue this. Wish you had more time, but our time is running out. So let me turn back to Michael Middleton. Mike?
Thanks, Satoru. I appreciate it. Let's give the debaters who participated another hand for joining us and sharing their ideas. It is always inspiring. And thank all of you for attending today's debate. I hope that all of us on the committee hope that it demonstrates that argumentation and debate continues to provide a critical tool for engaging difficult issues, and in this case, bridging communication across, as well as appreciating cultural difference. After the event, you'll receive a short survey. We'd really love it if you would fill that survey out. It helps inform our future programming. If you'd like to become more involved with CIDD, you can contact me or any of the members. Perhaps the CIDD committee members can give a thumbs up so you can identify who they are. We'd love to support your participation in future activities. So please continue to support speech and debate if you have it on your campus. If you don't, please try to get it on your campus. And if we can support you in those efforts, let us know. Have a wonderful long weekend, and we hope to see you at a future event.